of my favorite parts about this podcast is when I find someone else who loves to talk about books the same way that I do. And that happened this week with Kimberly Giarratano, who is the author of Death of a Dancing Queen, as well as multiple young adult books as well. But Death of a Dancing Queen is the one that I read recently and was dying to talk to her about it. And it's about Billie Levine, who, after her mother's Alzheimer's diagnosis, revamped her grandfather's private investigation firm and set up shop in the corner booth of her favorite North Jersey deli, hoping the free pickles and flexible hours would allow her to take care of her mom and pay the bills. So when Tommy Russo, a rich kid with a nasty drug habit, offers her a stack of cash to find his missing girlfriend, how can she refuse? At first, Billie thinks this will be easy earnings, but then her missing persons case turns into a murder investigation, and Russo is the detective bureau's #1 suspect. Suddenly, Billie is embroiled in a deadly gang war that's connected to the decades-old disappearance of a famous cabaret dancer with ties to both an infamous Jewish mob and a skinhead group. Toss in the reappearance of Billie's hunky ex-boyfriend with his own rap sheet, and she is regretting every decision that got her to this point. Becoming a PI was supposed to solve her problems, but if Billie doesn't crack this case, the next body the police dredge out of the Hudson River will be hers. I could not put this book down. I loved it so much, and let's get into it. So, did you always know that you wanted to write?
Yes, I did. I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a cliche thing to be like, oh, when I was a kid, but it's true. When I was in second grade, I remember writing a short story called Superflower. We had to make up our own superhero, and I thought I wanted to be a florist, like Janet on Three's Company. And
Yes.
so I wrote like a short story called Superflower. That's like one of the first things I remember writing creatively. And then in third grade, we had to write our own version of Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. This is how Gen X I am right now.
Okay.
And I decided, like, we could write two versions, one where he had a horrible day and one where we, as the character, had a horrible day, and one where we had a great day. And I was like, but a great day is not funny. Like, even at 8, I recognized that making people suffer was more fun than giving people everything they ever wanted. So I wrote that, and I remember we all had to get up and read in front of the classroom, and I remember my teacher, Mrs. Hart, if you're out there, her last name was even lovely, Hart. She was like, oh, I can't wait to hear this one. And I hadn't heard her say that about anybody else, but maybe I wasn't paying attention. So it just was like, oh, she wants to hear what I have to say. So, but yeah, I mean, I thought I was going to be Murphy Brown again, Gen X all the way, because I wanted to be a journalist and write for newspapers. And so I did for my student newspapers, middle school, high school, college. I was the news editor, but I didn't really have a good nose for news. It's really hard. But it did teach me to write. So I've noticed that when I read books by either current reporters or former reporters, that the writing really grabs me. It's incredibly meaty, specific. There is great specificity. I'm not saying that correctly. In writing by newspapers, reporters. And so it did really teach me how to write. And did I think I was going to write novels? I'm sure in my head I was like, oh, I'd love to write a novel one day. But I thought you needed an MFA or something, some kind of training. So I kind of sat on it for a while. But eventually then I became a librarian. And I was like, wait, I can do what these people do.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I loved my library job. I loved it. I was a young adult librarian. So I read nothing but YA for many years. I loved it. But I did sit down and go. Because when I became a young adult librarian was when Twilight blew up. And so there was all these great spec fic books coming out for teens. Some of them were amazing. I have a fly. Few. And some of them weren't. And I guess I looked at the ones that weren't. I was like, if they could do it, I could do it.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Though, like, even the ones where I was critical of, like, in hindsight now, I was like, it was hard to do what they did. Very, very hard.
Right.
So, but that's really when I started sitting my butt in the chair and working toward publication. And it still took many years after that. So, to answer that question, yeah.
Yeah. You know, you totally did. I have, like, more questions from it. So you did young adult was the first kind of novels that you wrote as well. So
Hmm.
did you choose to be a young adult librarian, or was it kind of like that was what was available and then you started to love young adult? Like how did you end up writing young adult?
The latter. I I got my degree in library science from Rutgers, and I went to, I think it was my first and only job interview, and it was in Rockaway Township, New Jersey. And I remember being in the interview, and they were hiring for a juvenile librarian.
Mhm.
And I was a teacher prior to being a librarian, and I worked with kids.
Okay.
So it was a natural fit that I could do that as well. But
Mhm.
then they started explaining that they didn't have a young adult librarian, and I had taken one YA class.
Mhm.
And I was like, well, you should have that. Like, that's what you should
Yeah.
have. Why wouldn't you get a YA librarian? And I sold myself somehow as a young adult librarian. And I got the job because they realized they didn't have a YA librarian and they needed one. So they hired me. And I, to
That is
that,
so
prior
cool.
to that point, had not read much YA.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I kind of got thrust into the role, which was great. And I
Yeah.
got a healthy budget. And my director was like, fix our collection. So I
Mhm.
did. And I read every book that came across my desk that I bought and
That's so
just
cool.
absorbed everything. So
Yeah.
it was a really fun job. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. And so then what did you enjoy about writing YA?
Oh, that's such a good question. So YA to me is incredibly fresh
Mm.
and incredibly emotive, right? You're dealing with
Yes.
teenagers and angst and subversive. I,
Mm.
teenage characters, particularly in spec fic, because I thought it was so creative.
Mhm.
Like, I hadn't read vampire novels prior to Twilight.
Yeah.
Um, and I just thought it was incredibly inventive in a way that I
Mhm.
guess I hadn't seen. Because when I was a
Yeah.
teenager in the 90s, there were, like, John Green didn't exist because he's only a couple of years older than me. So he too was a
Right.
teen. And I
Yep.
was reading, like, biographies, I was reading kids' books. I would read
Yeah.
really the gamut. But
Oh
there
yeah.
wasn't things for me.
Mhm.
And young adult literature really is in this incredible era
Mhm.
just of inventiveness. But I always I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I would sit down and read a YA book and they would get right into the action, right in.
Mhm.
There was none, there wasn't much build up.
Mm.
Um, it was always just, and it so inventive and progressive.
Yeah.
I think the publishing industry changes from YA out. I think YA is where
Ooh.
you see so much progressive literature happening, and then adult fiction is like, oh, yeah, we could have trans characters. We should do that. We could have
Right.
queer characters. We should do that. Like, I
You're
just,
right.
because YA is doing it first, I think, or I
Yeah.
think that's how it's been in the last, I would say, 20 years, I guess.
Yeah.
I
That's a
mean,
really good point. I feel like it is in TV as well. When
mm-hmm,
you were saying that, it reminded you did see like gay or trans or just more diversity of characters in like high school TV shows before it was like more mainstream to do it.
right. It's one of the funniest things is when I read reviews of adult novels. Like, I'll read the reviews after I've read the book. I'll read them.
Yeah.
And let's not Goodreads, but let's just take Amazon, and I'll
Yep.
see readers comment on things that make me laugh because as a progressive person, like the cursing, they don't like the swearing.
Oh my gosh, I know.
I'm like,
Yeah.
what world do you live in?
I know.
Like modern times. Like, who
Yeah.
cares?
Yeah.
And you never see that in young adult books because teens
Ah,
obviously don't care,
right.
and but also the adults who read YA
Hmm.
are progressive people who don't care about this stuff. So I guess I just feel like YA is such an explosion of modernity, and
Yeah.
the adult sphere is kind of catching up to that, I think.
I love that. I had never thought about that, and now you're making me want to read more YA actually.
So I still read a ton of YA. I was reviewing YA books for Book Page. I think since my son's
Mhm.
13. He's older than him, maybe 15 years I've been reviewing. And prior to
Oh,
Book
nice.
Page, I'd reviewed, because I was, as a librarian, I reviewed for School Library Journal, I reviewed for Booklist, and my first reviewer
Mhm.
job was at Publishers Weekly, and I would review
Mhm.
young adult for them. Um, so I had been in the YA sphere and absorbed in it for so long.
Yeah. That's
So I was
really
like,
cool.
naturally, I'm going to start writing in young adult, which is what I had done.
Yeah. Yeah. How did your writing process develop? So you mentioned you thought you needed to maybe have a degree or something to do it. How did it like develop on its own?
I read a lot of craft books. So I sort
Nice.
of gave myself, I just taught myself I just would absorb, and being a librarian, I was like, all right, just ILL all these
Right.
craft books on writing. And so that's what I would do. Writing fiction for dummies,
Okay.
Save the Cat, um, the Snowflake Method, like
Mm-hmm.
every craft book that existed, I would, um,
Yeah.
oh, the Story Genius, I have that at home.
Yes.
Um,
I love that
Everything like
one.
writing killer mysteries. If it
Mhm.
existed, I bought it and I read it, or I took
Cool.
it out from the library. And
I love
then
it.
one of the best classes I ever took, though. So when I wrote my first novel, which was Grunge Gods and Graveyards, that's my first
Mhm.
novel that I wrote from start to finish. It did get published in 2014 by a small press that's still around today. They do great work. They just don't take YA, I think, anymore.
Mm.
And they had trouble kind of selling it because they were a small press, digital, and then they did POD, print on demand. And one
Mm-hmm.
thing that we've learned, well, I certainly learned off of the course of my career, is teens don't want to read on their phones or their Kindle. They want books. And
Oh,
so I
yeah.
wasn't really selling my work to teenagers, to the audience it was intended to go to. I was selling it to adults, which is fine. Tons of adults read YA, but that's not the
Yeah.
audience that it's intended for. So I was
Right.
going off track. Oh, yeah. So I wrote
No.
my first book, and it was a mess because I think I was pregnant with my second kid at the time. So it was like a
Oh, wow.
race. I had to finish it before
Yeah.
he was born. And then after I finished it, I took Holly Lyle's How to Revise Your Novel course, which is this
Mm.
self directed 25 lessons class that
Ooh.
took me 6 months to complete. There was a huge
Okay.
forum. It was the best money I ever spent. And it
Wow.
wasn't cheap at the time, and I wasn't working. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just self-paced. I remember one lesson took me a month to complete, and I sat down
Wow.
every day and worked on it. I've never been
Wow.
that disciplined at anything in my entire life. And that class taught me, in revising my novel, it really taught me how to write. And then with subsequent books, you just get better. And now I've
Yeah.
developed, for my sleuth-driven mysteries, I really
Mm-hmm.
developed my own structure. It's the four-act structure. I didn't make that
Nice.
up, but I've
Nice.
taken the four-act structure and really ran with it in a way that allows me to plot my mysteries, um,
Yeah.
for great pacing, and also without
Mm-hmm.
just killing myself in the process.
Right. So do you plot it all out before you start writing, or do you pants it? Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm definitely a plotter, so I've plot very intricately and still gotten
Mm-hmm.
stuck.
Okay.
So for the second Billie Levine book that I'm drafting, no, that's done. Beg your pardon. For the third Billie Levine book I'm drafting,
That's
yeah. So
exciting.
there's 3 books. I'm contracted for 3 books. So if you
Oh,
enjoyed
that's
one, I
awesome.
hope you'll read 2 and 3. That's how
Yeah.
I'll. If everybody reads 2 and 3, that's how I'll get in 4 and 5. I mean, as you know.
Nice.
But
I hope so. I loved it,
thank you,
obviously.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. Publishing is such a ride because
Mm-hmm.
so many things are out of your control,
Yeah.
and you just want to like force your book on people. You must read this if I'm to make
Right.
more of them.
I
But
know. I know.
yeah. So after, to answer the question though,
Yeah.
um, I just drafted the first act because I write in 4 acts. So I
Okay.
plotted the first act. I'll draft it, and then I'll plot the second act. Then I'll
Okay.
draft it. You can probably hear my dog. I'll plot the third act. So that way, I think plotting all 4 acts as intricately as I did, I still got stuck, and I
Yeah.
didn't allow for some organic movement. So if I plot
Okay.
one act at a time, I think it'll allow for more organic movement. That's my hope. We'll see how it goes.
I like that. That's a really cool answer.
Thanks.
So obviously then you did kind of transition into adult fiction. So what made you want, like, what prompted this novel being adult?
So a couple of things happened here. I was an indie author. Even though my first book was published under small press, everything really
Mhm.
after that, and I had a Kindle Scout book,
Okay.
which is a defunct program by Amazon with crowdsourcing publishing. And
Mm.
long story short, I'm an indie author.
Yeah.
So I thought I was going to stay an indie author, But I felt like in order to kind of have success as an indie author, I really needed to write for adults because they're the ones who buy ebooks. Mm-hmm. And so I started writing. I thought I had this idea for a private eye novel series because I really missed Veronica Mars so badly.
Yeah.
And my mom has dementia, so I kind of wanted to explore what that felt like to be a child of someone with dementia and thinking about your own mortality down the way. And so for a main character to kind of be contemplating that, I could not figure them as a teenager. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
So I had this idea of a young adult, a young woman. She's pretty young. She's 24, so she's not my age by any means. But I had her in this role, like trying to start her life, but she can't really do what she wants to do because her mother has early onset Alzheimer's disease. So that in itself, the idea that I had, that I was like, I had her name come to me. I had her grandpa come to me, like things that I just felt really solidified. I was like, she's not a teenager. I don't want her to be a teenager. I want her to have to circumnavigate like the real world. Because teenagers can be kind of subversive because they're young. Not that they can, like in fiction, they can do whatever they want, but she can't really do illegal things because there are actual real adult consequences for it, whereas teenagers kind of can. So I just didn't picture her as a teenager. And I was like, all right, well, maybe this is a sign. I start writing my adult series and I self-publish it. But long story short, yada, yada, yada. I got an agent and Liza, who I love. And she's like, this book's ready to go. Let's see if we can, who we can sell it to. Still took almost 2 years to get it sold, but.
Okay.
So for anyone listening who's a writer who's going to go on submission, it can be a long road, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, that's good to know. For sure. So I loved the line that said private investigators work best when they were invisible and forgettable. Gramps hadn't taught her that. Jessica Jones did. So I was going to ask you if you've always been kind of like a PI noir fan, but if you missed Veronica Mars, I'm assuming you were, but has that always been something that you've loved as a genre?
I didn't realize how much I loved it as a genre until I watched Veronica Mars in the early aughts. And I love Batman, like noir Gotham Batman more than I love George Clooney, but that wasn't to me like that hard-boiled noir, like smoky steam coming off the streets, that city vibe. I was like, I'm like, damn, I'm really into this. Like, you never know. When you're kind of like, I was reading so much young adult and you didn't really find it too often in YA. And I kept looking for Veronica Mars in all the YA I was reading. Anytime a book was like, Veronica Mars meets this, I was like, that's my book. So, but I love Jessica Jones because it really had that vibe. And I'm always looking for it. The Perry Mason show that they revamped Perry Mason on HBO. I ate that up, and that was dark. Really dark. As a parent, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna watch this. I watched it. I love it. And I was reading old like Raymond Chandler. I really do like that kind of neo-noir, that vibe that's going. But I want it I want it accessible to me as well. And having a female protagonist who's Jewish like myself and who's from Jersey, I got to play with a lot of things that resonate with me and still have fun with it, but still keep that kind of sultry noir vibe to it that I enjoy.
Yeah. That's really cool because you do feel everything you mentioned there, like that where she's living, her mom, that she's Jewish, like all of that, like you really feel like it's so much a part of her through the whole book. And it sounds like maybe that's also somewhat because it was coming from you. So did you ever have to like separate yourself from the character at all? Were you ever like accidentally just like writing yourself?
Well, she's definitely not me because she's too cool and brave and ballsy in a way I would never be. Like that's the fun part of writing, right? I could be like, well, she's a badass. I'm not like that in real life. But the things that I got to explore that were very personal was obviously how she feels about having a parent with Alzheimer's disease, exploring what she thinks her future might look like felt really personal. And then there's just things I insert there that are fun for me, like her 90s fashion interest is because I was a teenager in the 90s. and stuff like that I can have a lot of fun with. I have the most fun writing her grandfather because he's so curmudgeon-y. I like writing curmudgeon-y old men. I just think it's a fun, really just a fun vibe. And in the second book, I have some great scenes with Gramps.
Oh, that's cool.
That where he gets to just be even funnier. I could just write him. Well, I think what I'm going to do one day is write a short story that's just Gramps. Maybe we can
that would be
put
cool.
it in, like, I meant to bring this up to my publisher, but I'll write a short story and then we could put it in a special edition or something.
That would be cool.
Just at the end, like, watch Gramps solve a case.
Oh, so I would love that. Yeah, I like curmudgeon-y characters in general, really, no matter what age or gender they are. Those are some of my favorites because
me too.
I can be that way. So
and because you know that there's an outwardness to them, but underneath they're a marshmallow.
Yes,
that's the Veronica Mars, right?
It is. So, it's that cinnamon roll analogy, I think.
Yes, I love that one too. So yes, I have a lot of fun. I also have a lot of fun just writing grumpiness is fun, you know.
Yeah.
It's just because it's also levity. There's a lot of levity.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I need to
You're right.
I always say when I write my Billie Levine, her personal life is tough in many ways. Mm-hmm. The levity comes obviously from her grandfather, but from the crime. Like I always say, the crime is not the most serious part of the book. I have a lot of right. I'd like to think people suspend their disbelief when they're reading my book because the crimes are sometimes crazy and outrageous, which is where the levity comes from. And then the serious stuff, the stuff that she really has to face, comes from her personal life, and that's where I don't want to. I don't know what's the word. I don't like in book 2, for example. Like she's dealing with a lot of anxiety. I don't really want to, like that I take serious, you know, so the crime is where it's the fun.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people reading crime fiction kind of know that, like, we're all fine with it being a little bit like pumped up for the fun of it. The crime part. Sorry, there's like a fly trying to take me out.
Did the fly from my house go to your house?
Oh my gosh, I think so. It was reminding me, and you might know this book since you did read young adult. This was published in 1998. But when you were saying like there's not as much sleuthy stuff, this was the one series when I was a kid that like I latched onto and loved, and it was Sammy Keys and the Hotel Thief. Yeah, I loved it so much, and it was one of those things where like generally growing up, it wasn't like that I was gonna. The way I grew up, I wasn't going to be allowed to go like right into mysteries and thrillers. But when I think back on the things I read that like I really connected with, like that was one of those books. And I remember even when I was reading yours, a couple months ago, I was like, this is like reminding me of what I loved about like reading Sammy Keys and like having a girl like actually solving stuff. So I just wanted to mention that. I had it pulled up and I totally forgot about it earlier.
Sammy Keys. So when I was a librarian, one of the most popular series in our library was Sammy
Loved
Keys.
it. And oh my gosh.
My daughter is 9, and I was like, oh, why don't you read Sammy Keys? Yeah. I think she will. She's still she's into graphic novels right now.
Okay. Well, I loved it so much. So if anyone has kids that they think might like mystery, it's so
Sammy
fun.
Keys, for sure, is where it's at. Well, thank you.
Yeah. So Billie, you kind of mentioned it at one point. She's kind of stuck between worlds. So she's like generally a like follow the rules PI, but she's also like connected to some like morally questionable people in the mobster world through Aaron. So how did you like handle that tension through the whole book and like still make it feel like she was making decisions that felt realistic to her?
I don't know if I consciously did anything. Yeah. Sometimes like when I create these people, sometimes they just feel so real that I'm like, well, what would be the issue here? You know, she definitely still loves Aaron. He was a big part of her adolescence, and she cares about his well-being so much. And but she knows in many ways he's bad for her. Yeah. And so I think when I'm writing, I just have to be conscious of both of who they are as people. As real people. Yeah. and make decisions based on that. And of course, my editor would go in and probably be like, that's probably not something she would do if I had made a mistake in that case. And then have me like make adjustments. But you know, also there's something about Aaron where he realizes he is the product of a gangster. And I kind of like, there are not Jewish mobs that I'm aware of anymore in North Jersey. Like, that's not a thing. So that's where somebody actually reviewed my book. I did not read this. My husband's like, oh, read this review. I was like, no, don't tell me. But somebody was like, I live in Teaneck and, you know, like, I've never heard of Jewish mobs. It's like, yeah, no, I wanted to bring it back. Like in the you know, like Jewish mobs, by the way, you know, we have like a family connection to Bugsy Siegel.
Oh, okay.
They're not a thing anymore. I just wanted to have fun and I wanted to play with the trope. And, you know, so I think of Aaron as this guy who really, just like Billy, is stuck. You know, his dad is a mobster. And he is the son of a mobster. And he learned criminality at a young age, which Billy points out frequently. And she paints him with that brush. She paints Aaron with that brush all the time. And he gets upset over it. Rightfully so. So there is that conflict between them where, you know, Aaron doesn't necessarily want to be the son of a mobster, but this is the life he knows. And crime is what he knows. And for him to change course is going to be a great, like, sacrifice on his part, a real, you know, so there's that. And then of course, Billy, who is trying a career where she does have to follow the rules, you know, in order to solve cases. She's not a police officer. So, you know, in many ways she doesn't, you know, she doesn't have to use warrants, but she can't just break and enter. So there's things that she has to do to stay within the law as well. So just by the true nature of these people, like, it just creates conflict.
Yeah. And they're both, as you were talking about, it was reminding me, they're both kind of, because, like, she's kind of taking on a family business because she, like, feels like it's the right thing to do at the time. And then he's also like, am I going to continue doing what my family did? So they're actually kind of paired similarly there as well.
Yep. Yeah. And that was a deliberate choice for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Nice.
But yeah, and then of course it just creates sexiness. It just feels sexy.
Right.
Tension.
Yeah.
And he's like an actual bad boy.
Yes, I know.
Not even doing legal things. I was like,
yes. In jail. Sometimes I text my friend if we're like buddy reading or something, and I'm like, the way I'm attracted to men that I shouldn't be feels alarming in books.
But that's why they're so great. Books are such a safe space for us to just observe people doing things that we would never do in a million years, never want to do in a million years. Like, that's why I enjoy TV so much, because it's other people's drama. Like, I watch something, I'm like, this is amazing. I wouldn't want this to be my life. I mean, the stress, but I will watch it. I like spy thrillers.
Oh, I'm so with you.
I love spy thrillers.
That's what I was going to bring up.
And my husband and I was like, who knew we would be spy junkies?
Yes.
Because it's so stressful to watch what's going on for them, but that's not my life. Like, I get to sit back over here and enjoy this. But I'm obsessed with Mick Herron's Slow Horses series on Apple TV, and I read all the books.
Okay. I need to watch.
It's a spy thriller, British spy thriller, MI5.
Yeah.
So the books are incredibly well done. They have a lot of dry British humor.
Oh my gosh, this is up my alley.
Okay, so Mick Herron, Heron.
Okay.
And ton of humor, but action. They're incredibly. He's such a great writer. The voice is brilliant.
I love that.
Mick Herron's supposed to be at a writers' conference next year in VoucherCon next year, 2024, and I'm going, and I'm going to fangirl hard. Just fair warning if the man's out there.
I mean, I feel like I'm going to start reading them, and I'll be right there with you.
Please, if you do, please have me back on, and we can just talk about Mick Herron for as long as you want.
I'm totally down to do that.
I love meeting people, and they're like sometimes I'll be like, oh, what are you watching on TV? Because I'm like hoping everybody watches television, and when I'm watching the series, and so am I. I'm like, oh, let's talk about it.
Yes.
I want to be that person.
Me too. I'm that way. I'm so much that way about spy thrillers too. So I loved your point about like you're experiencing things that you won't experience in your regular life, because my friend Gare reads a lot too, but he doesn't necessarily read spy thrillers. And so there's even a clip of it from early on in our podcast where he was like, "You are just an adventurous woman." And I was like, "From my couch? Sure." Like, if I'm sitting on my couch, you can call me adventurous, I guess.
Yes.
But I love them for that reason. They are so fun. I got obsessed with Ava Glass's Alias Emma series last year. The first one came out last year, and then I actually just got the arc of the second one. And I was like, I could read like 10 of these books. Like, I just love them so much.
I binge read McHarren, and I haven't binge read a series like that. Because normally I become fan of series, I gotta wait for the books. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the books were all out, and I read them all, like just one after the other. In fact, I think it kind of seeped into my writing for book 2, because I was reading so much of them while I was drafting. I'm getting my edits back in a week. I'll be interested to see what my editor says. She's like, "The voice seems a little different here." We'll see what she says. But he's such a great writer. Just the written word in his hands is like beautiful.
I am so excited.
Please, then we'll talk about it. Like,
yes, yeah, I'm totally down.
Can I have a whole conversation?
Yes, yeah. It's my favorite. Like, especially because, like, obviously you're really passionate about it, but I love that when it's like when you both read something that you're just absolutely obsessed with, and then you can talk about it for like an hour or more.
Yes, and unfortunately, I don't often get that interaction with a lot of people. Like, my husband's not a reader. You know, and friends will. It's fun when I read a book and I'm like, "You should read this book." One of my friends will just read whatever I recommend her, and because she's such an avid reader, and then then I'll be like, yes. But I don't always get to do that, so it's so fun when you run into people. Like, that's why I know. Like, when I meet strangers, I'm like, "Oh, you know, you're making chit chat and small talk." You're like, "Well, what are you watching on TV?"
I know. I like always assume people will have something they watched recently that they could talk about. Definitely with TV, it's like the easiest thing to go to if I don't want to do like small talk about the weather. Yeah. But then some people are like, "I don't know, I just don't watch much." I'm like, "Do you read?" And they're like, "No." And I'm like, "What do you do with your life?"
Or they sometimes like they'll just be watching reality television, which is fine, but that is the one genre I do not watch.
Yeah. I used to watch a lot more of it, and then I started reading more, and it just completely fell off. What was the other thing that was making me think of? Oh, that's been my favorite part about like Bookstagram and like talking to more people on there, is because I've noticed it's like people directly near me. First of all, I'm an introvert to begin with, so it's not like I have tons of in-person friends either, but it's like I wasn't running into people in my like literal town or the people I'm geographically located next to who had read a bunch of the books that I did. And so then, but it's like I've always wanted to talk about them, so that was part of why I started this podcast even. And then you get to know more people on like Bookstagram, and then you're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm reading that one right now." And that's been my literally my favorite part, is that you find people just anywhere in the world who are reading and like watching the same things.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's just instant connection.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. Like, it just doesn't feel awkward because you're like actually talking about stuff you both really love.
100%.
So, do you have any recommendations for books? Have you loved anything recently? I'm throwing the question back at you. What have you loved that you've read and watched recently?
So TV, I definitely recommend Slow Horses on Apple Television. So if you have Apple TV. What else have I been? So I've been reading a ton this summer. I've been reading a lot of historical fiction, or trying to get my hands on a lot of historical fiction, because I'm working on another project that's historical.
Wow.
Well, I have a bachelor's in history, and as a librarian, research isn't really too far out there for me, but I'm reading right now. So I was talking about newspaper writers as being really newspaper reporters being really strong writers. Yeah. So I'm reading, not that Jake Tapper needs help selling his books, but I'm reading The Hellfire Club by Jake Tapper. That's the first of his mysteries, and it's set in 1954 in DC. So I've been reading that, and he's he's good. He's great. Another newspaper reporter who's a great writer is James Keeley, Queally, He wrote 2 novels set in Newark, New Jersey, and they're fantastically written. Like,
nice.
If people want to learn how to construct a sentence using specificity and like the meat, so great. He's a great author too.
Yeah.
What else? I read House of Good Bones, T. Kingfisher. That was fantastic.
Okay. Yeah.
I really like her work. I also read What Moves the Dead. Just they're short. And they were perfect. I felt very accomplished. I was like, I'm done with the book. I can return it to the library. I swear, reading takes me a while now because I also can't read anymore for enjoyment, I feel like. I can. Yeah. I felt like for her, not a problem. But when I read a really great writer, I'm like trying to dissect and reconstruct how they write to see if I can pick up something. And it really is just ruined me. It's ruined me.
Oh no.
I know.
I recently read Save the Cat. You mentioned that earlier, and I read Story Genius a few months before that. And it hasn't taken the enjoyment, but what I do find myself doing is like marking all the parts of the pacing. And I'm like, okay, this is how she broke into two, and like
that's great.
It does make it more, it makes it a different experience though too.
That's genius. So when I tell people who are writing for the first time, they're learning, I'm like, deconstruct your favorite book.
Yeah.
Like map it. Just be like, all right, I'm reading. Why? You have to get really meta about it. You have to think about your thinking. And then, you have to deconstruct the novel. My favorite author in the entire world is Holly Black. Okay. Holly Black is my favorite author. We don't write in the same genre, but she is brilliant with her narrative voice. Like she's just, have you read Holly Black?
I have not. This is The Cruel Prince, right? So, I've seen it all over Book Talk.
She's been writing. So she and I've met her at book signings. When I was a librarian, I was like, if I ever meet Holly Black, we have so much in common. What do we have in common? Yeah. We're both from Monmouth County, New Jersey. We both went to the College of New Jersey as undergrads. We both went to Rutgers Library School.
Wow.
That's what we have in common. 3 things. But I was like, that's my icebreaker if I ever meet her. Yeah. And I did meet her, and that's what I started with. She's so lovely in person. But her writing, the woman never fails to just capture. Like, I am stuck in she is an auto-buy. I love this woman. And I don't buy books anymore because as a librarian, I'm a library user. I also now have a lot of shelf space. And like my library, my shelves in my house are kind of pathetic. Some people are like, you're an author? I was like, listen. But
I mean, I just filled mine in for the aesthetic because otherwise I'm an e-reader. So
I too am an e-reader because I can make the font super big. And
that's how I feel. Yeah. I opened one of these recently and I was like, how are people reading like this all the time?
I make the font huge. Like Sherlock Holmes. I'm going to be reading books like Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
So I read on my e-reader or I get from the library. And I right now I'm reading the Hellfire Club on the Libby app. Nobody has the Libby app. You should have the Libby app. It's great.
Yes.
And so, but she's incredible. But Cruel Prince, you could start with The Cruel Prince. That's a great series. If you want to even go back to her first book, Tithe, that's wonderful. Okay. It's a great Halloween read. Tithe is like a great Halloween read. I read it every October.
Modern Fairy Tales.
Oh,
that looks
good.
Fun.
So good.
That looks really fun.
It's wonderful. And that's how she started. I could just talk about Holly Black all the time too.
I love that.
She's we don't but I'll read her work, and again I will pick up things like she has just great word choice, like the right adjectives and verbs to convey things without having to fluff up the work, so to speak.
Yeah.
I like the efficiency of the way she uses, because she described things. You can picture everything clearly. She doesn't gloss over that. She's not a lyrical writer. I mean, but she's just there's so much meat in there that I just feel like.
You've sold me. So my TBR is just growing a million miles long this summer. So
I can't even imagine, because I have a TBR list too, because friends' books I want to read, and books I need to read for research, and there's just not enough time in the world to read everything.
I know. There's not.
And then to read backlists. But that's what happens when you fall in love with a writer. You're like, what else have they written?
Yes.
And then I go through everything.
That just happened to me with like 2 authors, Julia Heaverlin and someone else, where I read a book that came out this year, and then I was like, oh my gosh, they have 4 more books I need to read. It's so easy to have it happen.
Yep.
Well, where can people follow you so they can keep up with everything, especially since there are going to be more Billie mysteries?
There are. So I think, do I have a book up here? Oh, look, I do. I can even show it.
Nice.
Look how pretty it looks in the light.
It's so pretty. I love that cover.
So we're working on the cover art now for book 2. And I'm being a pain in the butt, I'm sure, to my publisher. I'm like, but the book 1 is so beautiful. We have to make sure book 2 is equally beautiful. Because I went into Barnes & Noble's in New York to sign some stock when I was in the city. And the staff were like, yeah, when we saw the book, we thought the cover was gorgeous. And I was like, oh,
beautiful.
Thank you. So book 2 is going to be called Devil in Profile. And it'll be out in March of next year. Book 3 does not have a title. I'm drafting it now, and that'll be out, I think, in March of 2025, which is so weird, like in the future. But you can all find me under my name, KimberlyGiarratano.com. And then, all my social is on the website, so you can find me there. You can Google my name. You can Google the book if you forget how to spell the last name. I married an Italian, so hence the long name.
Very Italian last name.
Yeah, I was like, there's so many. I mean, my maiden name is so phonetic, and then I married a Giarratano.
Yeah,
but, and then you can just if you forget how to spell, just Google the title. You'll find me easily. Queen. But so Devil in Profile will be out next year, and that was a lot of fun to write. So I hope that comes across. That there's a lot of funny scenes in there. There's a Hanukkah scene that I wrote that I had a really lot of fun with. There's a lot that book's a little bit more Jewish than the first one, because I got a rabbi making an appearance. Although I shouldn't say all this. My editor can come back and be like, we gotta cut that scene with the rabbi.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know yet. I haven't got my edit, so I shouldn't be talking my good game until it's out there. But
I'm sure it's gonna be great.
Yeah, so if everyone's interested, if they like Death of a Dancing Queen, then I hope they'll pick up book 2 and then book 3, because the only way I'm getting a book 4 and 5 is to come.
If we do that,
hang out.
Go pick it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast. I'm an extrovert, which is rare for writers. So I'm like,
I'm an extrovert when I talk about books. So
that's true. You're right. There are moments probably where we're more extroverted.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Between the Lines. And if you did, the biggest thing you can do to support the podcast is to go rate and review it on whatever platform you listen on. You can also follow me on Instagram at the girl with the book on the couch. And if you still need more thrillers in your life, check out Killing the Tea, my other podcast where I talk to my friend Gare about literally everything we read.